Hey everyone, how you doing? And this is your man Eliyah coming back again as an advocate for homelessness with a whole different type of perspective. I'm here with a friend Kristy, who works at a shelter facility, and of course my beautiful friend Amanda, who's always helping me with research as far as where I can go or helping me look up information. And the whole deal with me doing these types of interviews is to bring up the question, is homelessness an appropriate word for dealing with people that don't have adequate housing or have no housing, for those that are living out on the street, as you see in your parks or under bridges? And is there an adequate word that would fit everyone? Or should we just change it to a couple of words? Which is why I'm sitting with my friend Kristy, who, by working in a facility, probably has a little bit more insight into dealing with people that are considered or labeled homeless. And the first question I'm going to ask my friend Kristy, which she can elaborate on, is before you ever worked in a facility, what was your definition or how did you define the word homeless?
That's a great question, Eli. So I think I define homelessness like most people would. When somebody said homeless, I definitely thought of the guy on the street with a cardboard sign who's begging for money, and he's stinky and he's dirty, and you weren't sure if you should give him money or if it was I didn't have a good definition of homelessness before that. Now I think my definition is very, very different.
I bet you, because honestly, like in this society, a lot of times, whether it's a commercial or whatever, when people are promoting homelessness, they want to go for shock and awe. Right. So all of us are somewhat indoctrinated with the definition you just gave us, which is, until I dealt with homelessness in a sheltered environment, that's what I thought it was. Hey, the guy sleeping on the side of the road. So when I was sleeping in my sleeping bag, I looked at me as homeless and everything when I was in Sacramento. When I stayed in a facility, I didn't really consider myself homeless, but what drove me or brought me here was, oh yeah, you're homeless by definition. So that's also part of this, which I'll have in my blog. You all will have a chance to read in my WordPress blog, is the definition by law. Mm-hmm. So now that you are in a facility, you're working in the environment, how would you define homeless now or homelessness?
I don't even know if I would use the term homelessness per se. I would say there's unsheltered homeless. There are program resistant people who are homeless who don't want to come into a shelter. So now I would have categories. There are motivated homeless people who may be homeless because they had, say, a medical thing come up that kept them out of work, and they lost their job and lost their housing. Well, that's a different type of homeless than the guy with a sign on the street. So I think I'd have several definitions of homeless, and some of them might mirror the the current legal and the current language that's for writing grants and whatnot. But some of my definition may not be. For instance, I believe that the person who's couch surfing is also homeless, and they're not considered homeless by any definition.
Right. Matter of fact, I think the term they use for that is doubled up. They're doubled up. Right. And so there's a lot of people out there. And now I looked at that as homeless because that wasn't my resident. I didn't have a key, or it wasn't on my ID card. But that's not how all agencies see that.
Right.
So the term doubled up is a term that they will use for a person that what we call couch surfing.
Right.
And so that, again, is why I for those out there that's just meeting me or just getting to know me, I feel we use an ambiguous term with homeless because it's not getting to the core of a person's personal situation, and it changes every individual.
Absolutely, and I agree with that, and I would also say that homeless is a stigmatizing word. So I don't like it because when you hear homeless, you automatically get that image, right? Most people in society think, oh, the guy with the sign again, the person who's addict, the person who's mentally ill. Right. And though those are common conditions, that's not the whole span of what homelessness is to me. So,
right.
So I don't like the term at all.
So even in the facility or the places you've worked, are there different type of groups of individuals that end up staying in the facility? Like there's a children parent side, or does it break down into categories and facilities?
Absolutely. Even in facilities, it can break down. The facility that I work at has several different programs for different needs in the community, and we're always changing to suit the needs in the community. For instance, one thing that's happening in Atlanta right now is that gentrification is pushing people with fixed incomes out of their housing,
Right.
and they're not able to find adequate housing in an affordable and quick manner because of all the startup cost deposits, things like that.
Right.
So we've created a program specifically for people who are 55 and older and have SSI or SSDI, those kind of benefits to help them with specialized case management and different allowable things in that program that really targets helping our aging adults.
Where's the funding for that, out of curiosity?
We don't have any funding for that per se
you're just
right now.
connecting.
We're just connecting, right, and it's that is something we're looking into expanding to see if there is some funding out there. But my organization is in a spot where we can move forward sometimes without funding, although funding is always preferred.
Yes.
It is easier with funding, no doubt. So,
And
yes,
again, now see the individuals you are helping, are they staying in the facility you work at?
yes,
And that is a sheltered facility.
correct.
And technically, that's temporary sheltering.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I agree that at times, even though someone's going to say homeless, well, they're not technically the person on the street with a sign.
Right,
They are in a temporary housing facility. So they
Right.
are sheltered,
right.
but that's not a permanent shelter
No.
facility.
And like you said, there's no keys to the door. There's still all the facility rules you have to follow. So it's still classified as homeless, but that's classified as sheltered homeless by the technical definition.
And that's my point with bringing up, well, we can say homeless, but what are we saying when we say the word homeless? I mean, there's a lot of people that are doubled up that are not going to be seen as homeless. Like in Atlanta here, you can't go get what they call a Grady card at the federal hospital if you're doubled up.
Right.
You can't.
You're not eligible for those benefits.
Yeah, so that's like your Medicaid and Medicare. They would deny you initially because, well, you're staying somewhere. You're housed. Now, the thing for me is, well, that's temporary. That's not permanent housing.
Right.
And so that leads into other issues like squatters and squatting, and all of a sudden someone's a tenant that you were just being kind enough to help out, and all of a sudden there's your tenant, and now you have to have an eviction notice.
Right.
So again, and I bring this up because across the country, so anyone that's my friend out there and you're not in Atlanta, because it's always indigenous as far as how the laws are applied. It's where you live, not just your state. It'll break down to your city and maybe even just your county. May see it different. Decatur out here in Georgia, the DeKalb County may do it differently than Fulton County, which may do it different than Cobb County.
They do.
So it really becomes, okay, are we dealing with homelessness, or are we dealing with different ways to deal with sheltered and unsheltered individuals?
So speaking of who counts, and Eli mentioned this across the country, ways of counting, but also we've seen that supposedly the number of homeless people are going down across the country. Is that something that resonates with how you experience your day-to-day work in the facility?
Not in Atlanta. Not here in our facility. I can say this, that one of a large shelter closed was it 2018? Was it 2018?
Late
No, it was
20
late 2017 is when
Yeah.
it was. Since that shelter closed, our numbers have been higher, and we're experiencing higher numbers of individuals coming into our programs and people sleeping under the bridges, and so we've noticed those numbers go up. We know that some numbers are going down, partially because of the economy and the housing first models of handling homelessness is helping people to get rehoused quicker. But now the question is are they maintaining that housing?
Right.
What's the recidivism on that? I don't think we have a lot of good information on that yet.
Something that needs to be looked at.
Right. And some of what's being reported is what's called functional zero, which is not actual zero. For instance, New Orleans reported that they had ended veterans' homelessness, that they were at zero.
Right.
They didn't. What they did was they got to functional zero. So they went out, they identified all the veterans, which is not necessarily a bad thing. got housing for everybody who wanted housing. So those veterans who maybe are staying under bridges, especially those Vietnam era, Korea, those guys who may not want to come into a facility because of the mistrust. Yeah. So those folks are still out there on the street, but they have said that no, they don't want housing. They don't want to be in the program. So they've housed everybody that they can easily house, and they call that's functional zero, and that's what they have said, that they have ended veteran homelessness by that. Now, not that that's not a great initiative.
Sure.
So for that, I think, but at the same time, how do we reach those, so program resistant, those folks who don't trust the authority or don't want to deal with the facility, or, how do we reach those unmotivated kind of individuals?
And see, that's like a whole nother ball of wax, because a lot of cities are doing exactly as New Orleans have done. Because I went to a site, which I'll put in the blog. I'll make sure everyone has a link to the blog where they actually give step-by-step advice on how cities can do what New Orleans did, which Atlanta also is following the model.
Yeah, Atlanta.
And so what happens with those numbers is, yes, I have to agree, they're slowly going down. They're going down. However, I'm going to hopefully in the future, near future, get other individuals from other shelters to get their thoughts on the same question, because it's not so much that they're ending homelessness as they're sheltering more people, or adequate shelter is being applied. Because honestly, in my thought process, you'll never end homelessness, because there is that group that don't want to stay in facilities.
Well, and that's the challenge. And, that's been the thought, is that there are people who are never going to want to remain in facilities and whatnot. But I think that there may be a way to approach them one day to end homelessness. I just don't think we're there yet. I don't think we're going to see it in our lifetime. But I think if we change our thinking, and if we can get some of those terminologies changed, those ambiguous blanket terms, so we can get that idea of homelessness out of being what it is out of people's heads, and get some understanding in the community, maybe we can find some good solutions.
Because
I'm hopeful for that.
You're bringing up a good point, because when you say the word homeless, you're going to mix that group that's willingly staying an unsheltered environment along with those that may be leaving a domestic violent situation, or just came out of incarceration, a long incarceration, or someone that was affected by a catastrophic event.
Right.
And so everyone...
Which will always happen.
Always.
So you're always going to have people who might, for a time, need shelters.
And so now all of those individuals are lumped under this one term, homeless. Well, actually, some of them are just temporarily unsheltered.
Right.
And it's not like they're not employed, because, again, you're in a facility. I'm confident you know that there's people that work, that have jobs.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. We have programs specifically for people with jobs, so we do. And we help with income, and, we have a network, so it's a good thing.
So, so again, technically they have income. It's just not enough to afford housing at that time.
Right. Or so to afford to move from one spot to another, because those startup costs can be so costly with the deposits of the utilities, the rent, the application fees, all that stuff.
So I mean, I'm encouraged by the initiatives that the city has taken, the government has taken, and those are great initiatives. The thing I feel that we probably need to address mostly is just that label, that term homelessness itself, when a lot of times we're dealing with sheltered versus unsheltered. Because once we get to who's unsheltered, then that gets to break down categorically to maybe we're dealing with mentally challenged individuals, or just those that don't want to stay in no facility. And once we get that number of group identified, or identify that unsheltered group willingly wanting to be unsheltered group, then we can say, hey, we know this group. Then you're going to be able to say, but we have this sheltered group that are in these different categories. And then maybe we can say, well, now funding goes, or we can deal with those that are in temporary sheltering positions, and maybe the programs then apply programs to each individual's situation. Because again, some people are working, some move from out of state to a new state or city, and there's all sorts of reasonings that send someone to a sheltered facility.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because they have some addiction or anything like that, but they just need temporary housing.
Mm-hmm.
To that point, I'm curious if you have a sense of being able to compare the population that was coming from the shelter that was shut down versus this population that's dealing with gentrification and cost of rent. How is one
very different?
and,
Yes,
but so just in
vastly
terms of
different.
size too, I was wondering, is the population from the shutdown shelter larger than this gentrification group, or is it hard to even compare in that way?
Hard to compare. I don't have the numbers on how that would have increased from that shelter closure.
Mhm.
I do on the aging adults who were pushed out. We saw a 200, I think it was a 200% increase in our
Wow.
population. So it went from 4% to 12% last year of 55 and older. That is a huge number. That is a huge number. Yeah, it's incredible, and I know that Atlanta is taking some great steps to try to get some affordable housing work done.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I don't think it's happening fast enough.
Right.
But you know, and that's a process that's definitely needing to be addressed and is being addressed. So
Okay.
yeah.
Well, we're going to cut our segment short, or let's just say it's the end for today. I mean, again, this is not no official channel or nothing. This is just human beings being human beings. Citizens in a city that's concerned. And that's what this country is built on. It's built on the citizens themselves. We're the ones that drive the government. And when we learn that we are the ones that are empowered, have the power and the authority to apply what we want to happen in the society, changes will be made. Not can be or should be, but changes will be made. So I'm just beginning my journey, and I feel very confident that there are those out there that will probably join in your city, in your state, where you live. And let's work with these terms and these labelings of human beings. We're all human. Everyone is existing that's born alive is human. Now, some of us have shelter and some of us don't. Let's just deal with it that way. Trying to lump us all under one umbrella and one word, I feel confident that that's wrong. And it's not correct. It's misleading and it's so ambiguous when it comes to groups that want to help. They're also fighting these stigmas and these labels because, hey, let's face it, some shelters are shelters with a program that doesn't apply to a temporary housing facility that's just, assisted living. And assisted living is different than an all women's program or all children's program. So let's work together as a nation, as a community, as a family, as people, to work with these terms, make these terms tangible, usable, applicable, not so ambiguous, but straight to the point, so that when we go to help individuals, we already know who and what we're dealing with and where to go and the steps that are necessary to help an individual. Anybody else want to say anything?
I think we're good.
Yeah. Thanks,
It's
Eli.
great.
Eli.
See you all again in the near future.
Bye-bye.